Thank you. I'm very encouraged by your comments.
Carol Fripp, Leaside Property Owners Association. We're spending an awful lot of time at VOMB, not just on the big proposals, but on individual house construction, mammoth house construction, and so on. So a lot of internal neighborhood issues as well as along the periphery. And we're very worried about that. It's a huge cost, but it's important to appear there. Our MPP, who happens to be the premier, tells us that the city already has the tools to form its own, to create its own OMB-like city-sensitive board. So I'd like to know why this hasn't happened yet. If we have the tools, why haven't they been used? What can you do to help the process along, and what will you do?
So the tool that your MPP was referencing is a local appeal body. That is absolutely correct that the city has been giving the powers to implement. Two comments about that. One is that this is currently being implemented. It's being implemented through clerks. Is it clerks who's leading it? It's being implemented through the clerks department. It's not something that city planning would implement. In fact, it would be a conflict for us to implement it because it's an appeal to planning decisions. The second is that it only pertains to Committee of Adjustment applications. It's appeal of Committee of Adjustment applications, not other applications. That's the second for the local appeal, and that's only the power that was given to the city by the province. The third is that it's very important to note that I actually think focusing on establishing a local appeal body is, quite frankly, barking up the wrong tree. We're putting lots of resources essentially into delivering a service that the province currently delivers. The problem with the OMB, it's a quasi-judicial body, so we would be taking on that quasi-judicial body. If we operate that quasi-judicial body without political interference, in theory, you would get the same outcomes. In theory, you would. So what that suggests is that our bigger problem is actually one of the earlier comments, which is about the policies we have and needing more policies and needing stronger policies. And one of the challenges that we face as a city, this city lost almost 15 years in updating its policy because you know what we were doing? We were amalgamating. I showed up at City Hall. You would be shocked at how much isn't yet amalgamated. So whereas other cities were moving ahead and writing new policies and getting out ahead of the growth, we were actually going back to old policies and kind of fighting over what policy was going to supersede what. We were only consolidating old policies, and that's what we did with the zoning bylaw. We spent 15 years to consolidate our zoning bylaw and millions of dollars. We didn't update it. We just consolidated it. So the development permit system is actually a way to update the zoning bylaw because it repeals the base zoning and puts a new regulatory framework in place. But one of the challenges we have in this city is that we are 15 years behind in a period where there has been significant growth, and it's because so much effort has gone into consolidating policy frameworks as a result of amalgamation. So that's the hand we were dealt. We're finally at a point now where I think we're trying to get out ahead of some of that. We very quickly brought forward, when I arrived, one of the first things I did was start bringing forward the development permit bylaw, which is the strongest regulation that we could possibly have. That really is going to be the key for the future, but yeah, it should have been done 15 years ago.
Well, we're just concerned that by the time all of these studies come to be, that there won't be a Leaside left to protect.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge. We're very concerned about that as well. We're very concerned, and it's one of the reasons why we prioritized doing this focus area. Trust me, there's communities across the entire corridor who want their focus area to be first. There's many of them that are not being done in 2016 because we simply can't do them all. But we are very concerned about that as well. We share that concern.
In the early 1990s, there was a great deal of development on the waterfront. Developers were, I think the city planning office was overwhelmed with the number of development proposals. And what transpired was the ruining of our waterfront. The city planning department could not keep up with the plans of what Toronto as a city needed. And when you compare our waterfront to cities like Chicago, Toronto is an abomination. And what I see happening right now is the equivalent of the development in the early 1990s, where, as you just said, you're worried about it as well. The city planning studies, if you're doing 17 a year, I think there's something wrong with the economic framework that allows you only to complete that many in a year, while creating the opportunities for these developers to get all these planning applications to build 36-story towers that have the potential to ruin neighborhoods. So I would ask you, as a planning department, would you consider a moratorium on the development of these high-story structures in neighborhoods like Leaside until we can have these studies completed? Because I don't think it is reasonable to assume that going from a single-family house to having your next door neighbor as a 36-story tower is reasonable. No plan, once assessed, is going to accept that. So I would ask you to put a moratorium on these developments until these studies can be properly concluded and planned for.
Trust me, if we controlled the world, or the universe and the economy, we would definitely slow things down. But we actually don't have that control. We don't have that authority. We, in fact, are...
Who does? How do we get that done?
Technically the province, right? The province does, because our policies and what we're required to do is, in fact, regulated through the Planning Act, which is a provincial framework. This is why we're often fighting with the province, because we're trying to adjust and change our powers in order to make them more applicable to the Toronto context. In part because, London, Ontario, which is a city of 250,000 people and has slow growth, has the same planning act that we do. And that's a problem. It's the same planning act no matter what the scale of the city. And the city of Toronto has a lot of unique circumstances, including a very, very hot market. So we don't actually have the authority to say no. We simply can't. We can't stop growth. That's not something we can do. In fact, we accelerate growth as a result of the timelines that are given to us by the province. We have timelines within which we must respond to a development application once it comes forward. And we get penalized, or the applicant can go to the OMB if we don't respond within that timeline. So we simply don't have the authority to do that. We can't stop growth. We do have a very free market. This is a free market. It's not a highly regulated city that we have. We're trying to move to have more regulations. The development permit system would be more regulation. More heritage conservation districts would be more regulation. But right now, this is a very unregulated context. So it's challenging. I'd love to slow it down.
Thank you.